Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on conservation practices amid a pandemic, Southeast Asian perspectives. I am Lilian Rehante Manahan. I'm the chairperson of the Heritage Conservation Society here in the Philippines. And it is an honor for our organization to be hosting this online public presentation with our distinguished guests and panelists who are members or representatives of their respective Southeast Asian countries of the newly formed ASEAN Cultural Heritage Alliance. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you our esteemed men and women who compose the panel for today. From Malaysia, we have Ku Salma Nasution. She's the Vice President of the Penang Heritage Trust, Asian Public Intellectual Fellow of the Nippon Foundation, and an author of several books on Penang history. From Myanmar, we have Dao Momo Win. She's a conservation director for the Yangon Heritage Trust.
Hello.
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 Also former General
Nice
Secretary.
to meet you all.
Hi. She's also the former General Secretary of the Association of Myanmar Architects. She's an architect and an urban planner. And from Singapore, we have Dr. Johannes Widodo, Associate Professor of Architecture at the National University of Singapore. Dr. Widodo is also the founding member of ICOMOS National Committee of Singapore, Associate Member of the Asian Academy for Heritage Management, Advisory Board Member for the National Heritage Board of Singapore. And also from Singapore, we have Jonathan Poe, Executive Committee member of the Singapore Heritage Society, founder and principal architect of Provoke Architects. Good afternoon. Then from Vietnam, we have Nguyen Duc Tan, who is the Director for Research and Promotion
Hi
of
everyone.
Cultural Heritage. Hello.
Hi everyone.
And finally, from the Philippines, we have Michael Manalo, Commissioner for Cultural Heritage, National Commission for Culture and the Arts, Head of the National Commission for Monuments and Sites, former Chairman for the Committee on Culture, UNESCO National Commission, and he's also the Principal Architect for MNL Solutions. So, as we commence this discussion, I would like to turn you over to our President of the Heritage Conservation Society, Attorney Mark Evidente. It's all yours, Mark.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and a happy Philippine National Heritage Month. Welcome to this joint activity of the Heritage Conservation Society Philippines and the Southeast Asian Cultural Heritage Alliance. National Heritage Month, of course, is a coming together of the efforts of the different government cultural agencies in the Philippines, civil society organizations like HTS, academia, and other institutions to celebrate the richness and diversity of our cultural heritage. And on behalf of HTS, we are proud to have with us, through the Southeast Asian Cultural Heritage Alliance, our colleagues from across the region representing Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, Myanmar, and the Philippines. This year's theme for Philippine National Heritage Month is Mga Kwentong Pamana, or Stories of Conservation. In that theme, we wanted to explore the stories across Southeast Asia, especially in how heritage should have a place even as we all struggle with the public health, economic, and social impacts of the pandemic. My own work focuses a lot on tourism development planning, and of course, heritage conservation has long been tied to it, whether in terms of maintaining and helping these sites as tourism attractions or of tourism revenue providing much needed funds and interest for conservation. But where the UN World Tourism Organization predicts a decline in international tourism to 60 to 80% lower than 2019 levels. Even in our own research here in the Philippines, we're seeing domestic tourism, if it starts opening up, to gradually climb, but only level off at around 40 or 50% of 2019 levels. No? So in this context, when you have these problems for tourism, and you also have these broader problems of public health, the economy, and the social change that's happening because of the pandemic, how do we see conservation as part of our national priorities? With countries going into debt to ensure that people do not starve, to keep economies in life support, and there is as yet no clear way forward without a viable vaccine. Will development agendas change? And how do we keep heritage as part of that development agenda? So, of course, these are just some of the questions that a lot of us in the heritage community are worried about, are preoccupied with, as we ourselves try to figure out a way through this pandemic. And it's great that across Southeast Asia, we all have very different experiences on how our countries are managing the pandemic, and this adds a layer on top of how our different countries have also seen and used and worked with heritage. So in that context, we're really glad to have our guests here today, and I've asked them all to share their thoughts just about the role of heritage within this pandemic. What's our role in the conservation movement, and how we can help address all these questions, both in our own countries and in the broader community throughout the region. Okay, and with that, perhaps I'd like first to go to Dr. Widodo Johannes. We'd be glad to hear your thoughts on this matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think we are given two questions to address from each country. The first question is about the specific conservation issue that inherent in our regions that need to be addressed. And of course, I think the most important and the most pressing issue is economy. And no one knows how long that this lockdown will last, even if we are opening up, how long that we can travel across the borders. It depends on the trust of different countries, whether they allow people to visit each other. But I think the most devastating effect of this is about job. There's a lot of people lost jobs. Even we cannot pay rent. Maybe also related to productions and constructions. Everything is affected. So I think if we are talking about the inherent issues that nowadays that we still have to face and we don't know the answer yet. First is of course is the visitors. As just now mentions about the tourism industry. We need to think about the revival of different types of businesses. We have to restart adjusting to permanent change. So it's not just new normal. Maybe it's still abnormal for several years ahead. A second issue that is faced by Singapore and also some countries in the region, of course, is the property market. It's not very sure whether the property will pick up again, but one positive thing that from the conservation's point of view is that we have a time to pause a bit from the frenzy of redevelopment, of constructions, of demolitions. So at least we give time to think about the possibility of adaptive reuse, the possibility of using heritage as a capital for recoveries and for the new types of economy that will appear later, or to take stock about our own heritage, to do a cultural mapping. Maybe it's not on the field, but it could be doing something on research to make a part of the heritage urban landscape, for example. It's a good time actually to take stock during this pause of several months or several years. The third issue, I think, also related to conservation, is related to urban planning and urban design. Well, we always blame density as maybe the cause of the spread of the virus, but density actually is not the issue. But the issue is really overcrowding, is the crowd management. We know that the issue in Singapore in the foreign workers compound that contribute to the high increase of the coronavirus infections in recent weeks, and this is also related to crowd. So maybe the life after COVID, after the opening, our urban plan and our urban design, the public space, everything should change. Maybe we cannot return to the normal. Also, even we experience working at home. Children, father, mother work together in very noisy and crowded space and very cramped apartments. That may also change the way we think about architecture and the arrangement of the space within the house. So these factors actually is a very, very uncertain at the moment, but we can start to think about what is the things that we can change after the situations getting better. And then the second issue that we need to address is how this pandemic actually affecting the viability of sustainable conservation projects. There are happy things. I think I always say probably COVID is not bad at all. Is something good. The ozone layers is closing. The carbon footprint is getting lower. So probably the best thing that happening during this coronavirus lockdown is the increasing public consciousness We are conscious now about our own heritage, about our intangible and tangible heritage. There are so many talks, so many Zooms. So some people is getting Zoom fatigue or Zoom phobia, but there's a lot of increasing interest in conservation. Even people start to learn how to cook traditional food, how to do a martial arts, how to look into areas or tourism destinations that never visited before just by online medium. There's so many talk that fill in our knowledge about heritage. So, and the second is, of course, is the sense of love and attachment to the home. That we miss something. We miss a good place that we never visited. We miss the museums. We miss a certain street or neighborhood or certain food. And this kind of attachment emotionally is very, very positive effect of this so-called the retreat. So we are retreating from the world and then we are miss the world. The second thing that is good about this is the change of lifestyle. So probably this pandemic make us reconsider our consumption pattern. We become more prudent, more thrift. We selectively take what we need, not what we want. It educates us about how to live more responsibly. We are learning about social responsibility, how we have to cover our mouth so it's not causing other people to get infected. So we are learning to be restrained, to restrain ourselves from being greed or being selfish. So this the change in individuals and also affecting the families and affecting the whole society. I think in the long run will give a very good effect also to how we treat our environment and buildings. Maybe it's better to conserve rather than to destroy. It's better to keep rather than to throw away. The other things that is also interesting that happen and positive things about the COVID is about the nature, about the biodiversity. You see, the grass is coming from the pathways. The wild animals start invading the town and the street. For the exercise, we go out and really enjoy and appreciate our green corridors, for example, or small gardens, even in the balconies. So green living, healthy living, wellness, a more clean living is somehow is also reviving the whole to curing the nature, a cure to the environment that we destroyed and we mess up with for several generations. And in Singapore, in the context of Singapore, of course, the push into from the garden city into city in the garden and becoming city in nature will getting more momentum. So considering all of this, I feel very positive actually that probably what is going on now is very good for humanity. It's very good for healing. You know, it's healing in terms of relationships with nature, healing in our relationship with heritage, with conservations, with other people. But I think most importantly is that we become a new and refreshed individuals and human being to be more responsible for the next stage of development of our civilizations. Thank you.
Okay, it seems that we have. Thank you so much, Dr. Widodo. That was so positive. It was such a positive note, despite the darkness of this situation now. Thank you so much for that. I think we have another participant coming in. Can we have our participant, our new panelist? Is there someone? I think, Mark, we should go on first because I don't think our panelist has come in yet. Our backstage staff hasn't put them in. So maybe you can go to the next panelist for the next perspective. Jonathan, would you
Hi.
like to do your presentation now?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm an EXCO member of the Singapore Heritage Society, as well as a member of the Singapore Docomomo Working Group. I have actually prepared a slideshow to just focus on the issues around privately owned modern built heritage in Singapore. Okay, can you go to the next slide? So what I will talk about today is to basically give you a background situation on the COVID situation in Singapore first, and then I'll frame what were the pre-COVID issues that we are still facing today, even amidst COVID. And I'll use this one example, Pearl Bank Apartments, which we had efforts in trying to conserve as a case study to demonstrate these issues. And then after that, I'll talk about, okay, what are going to be additional issues beyond these pre-existing issues, and what are the possibilities that can happen after that. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so to give you a background, the first COVID cases in Singapore actually were detected in January, and then the first spike actually came from after Singaporeans came overseas, and we were only seeing a few cases until the second spike of cases sprouting in workers' dormitories started to happen, right? So that sort of spurred a circuit breaker enacted by the government to kick in on 7th of April, and then we are coming into the end of it already by 2nd of June. But people are continuing to work from home, and if those people can't work from home, they either take home leave or they look for alternative work to do. Otherwise, essential services are allowed to continue. So our infected cases right now is close to 30,000, and then the government is also slowly looking to improving dormitory conditions, right, in order to alleviate the problems of dormitories. Right. And also, Singapore is also prepared to tighten social distancing measures if there is a second wave of infections coming. Next slide. So what happens then is that in terms of the economy, business owners, tenants, landlords, they are suffering quite badly in most of these modern buildings, right? Aviation, hospitality, tourism, arts and entertainment, retail, F&B, all these are the worst hit industries. And the forecast of our economy is quite bad. Recession is inevitable. The risk appetite of developers are also shrinking. And cash flow of construction companies are also badly affected, right? And we're not too sure. And we do have generous amounts of government handouts given to Singaporeans to tide through this very bad situation. But if there's a resurgence of the pandemic, we're not too sure what will happen, right? So let's go to the next slide. So how will the post-COVID pandemic will potentially affect efforts in conservation of modern heritage? So before we even go into these, I think it's good to actually frame our pre-COVID issues. What we are actually facing now is actually a lack of comprehensive grading system to existing stock of privately owned modern heritage buildings, all right? And conservation decisions are usually left to the market forces, right? There's also an underappreciated awareness of our built heritage, right? And there's a vicious cycle of poor estate management in practice, and poor management leads to bad perception of these buildings. Right? And land use laws intended for urban regeneration have side effects of encouraging speculative en bloc agitation, right? And the perception that rehabilitation and adaptive use of high-rise and high-density modern structures is unfeasible from a financial and technical standpoint in this aspect. Next slide. As such, there is this issue that it's because of these issues that led to a Singaporean en bloc fever, where there is not much choice left, but to actually collectively decide to sell the building and to a property developer and rebuild. Okay, next slide. So what we did as part of Docomomo SG was that one of our first few projects was to try to see how can we save this modern heritage gem, Pearl Bank Apartments, It is a groundbreaking prototype bearing extreme urban intensification and high quality living spaces. It has spaces that have split levels, right? Interlocking split level maisonette design, right? And it has also a broken cylinder that offers views and captures breeze, right? So it was intended for this building to be, or rather the residents intended to voluntarily conserve this building. However, I think they went through various attempts, but it was unsuccessful. Right? And it was eventually sold to a developer called Capital Land through a private treaty because I think they ran out of ideas already. So they went through the back door and they sold the building eventually. So on the right, you can actually see what the residents actually thought of doing, which is to do a small little part of the building and then sell it, and in the end use that proceeds to maintain the rest of the building. But that didn't fall through. So eventually it was sold to a developer who will redevelop the entire building as per what you see on the bottom few images. Right, next slide. So what we tried to propose to them as an alternative was assisted living kind of model, right? Rehabilitated into Pearl Bank with a mix of uses like co-working, commercial, and other programs to help complement assisted living, right? So, but the problem is that there were a lot of question marks that was not properly answered at that point in time. So it was a little bit hard to push this to the developers. Next slide. So what we did was that we went through. We also tried to convince them that it is a sustainable solution, right? And where if you keep the building, it's going to be it's going to benefit the environment in the long run. Next slide. And then we also looked in. So one of our first few efforts was to actually see how can we decant the interiors of the building to suit the market demands, because the ceiling heights are quite low, and try to see how can we decant some areas so that some ceiling heights can be higher, and we also change the bookends to create smaller apartments to meet the demands of the market. Right, next slide. So there are a lot of takebacks from this because eventually we failed to conserve this building due to these four main issues: awareness and political will, regulations and financials, technical knowledge, and then an issue of time. Right. So all these has got to do with regulations, the way that financial institutions work, so on and so forth. And there's also a lack of technical know-how as to how do we then conserve the structures of such huge buildings. Right. So these are the challenges that we faced. So next slide, please. So how will the post-pandemic world then exacerbate efforts like this, right, in conservation? So as I said earlier, I think there's a developers, property owners, declining appetite for risk for these kinds of alternative uses, right? There's an inflexibility in the existing structures as well to meet market demands, like what I said. You know, the ceiling heights of these buildings are pretty low. So I mean, if it's supposed to be a full residential kind of new use, these become very challenging for the new developer to undertake, right? And then traditional adaptive reuses such as hotels, service apartments, co-working spaces, all these will not work if we continue our new normal, which is to work from home, or the low tourist numbers, right? And then there's also the decreased awareness of heritage buildings now, because we are fighting attention with the press for news related to pandemics, right? And there's also this health ministry's requirement for additional swing spaces in certain buildings to cope with potential lockdowns in future. So this has a problem with our current if we are dealing with current infrastructures in modern buildings, right? And then there's a decreased business occupancy in heritage buildings, which is a push factor for individual owners to sell the building as a whole. And then the knee-jerk reaction to construction costs being jacked up as a result of more stringent requirements on migrant workers, right? And because manpower is decreased in construction sites, you have a longer time to construct, right? But that in itself also cause cost issues to the developer. And the last slide. So these are some ideas that we thought as a group we could actually put forward. One thing is, of course, policy reforms, which we had to deal with pre-COVID, right? And another possibility is to even think about a new building typology. So we should develop new resilient typologies in existing buildings in the form of affordable or assisted living housing as a way to extend the life of these current buildings, right? In the midst of this low demand to buy these buildings in the time being, and simultaneously meet the demands of the community as well. We could also actually create virtual platforms to well publicize the building's significance, and perhaps maybe develop a guidebook for developers to help them navigate through this very complicated process of statutory and financial help through this development process. Yeah. So yes. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Johannes. Thank you, John. I think it's good to see that kind of the spectrum of issues that we're looking at. No? That from Johannes, I see that it's this macro view of looking at the opportunity that COVID gives us in society. It's an opportunity for us to take a step back and reset from all that frenetic development pressure that all our countries have been under. And it's good to see also from Jonathan's point of view how it's shaping an actual project and looking at that level. Okay, maybe from here we'd like to move to the experience of Myanmar. No, I'd like to hear from Dao Momo Luin, who is the Conservation Director of the Yangon Heritage Trust. Hi, Momo.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. For me, Johanna, in the first speaker, has speak a lot about the overall view on the recent COVID and the potential and the future of conservation practices across the region. I will be talking similar because of in the recent wake of COVID, we can anticipate two scenarios. First one is we have to adapt it to it because we don't know how long it will be. It may be for a few years, and we have to adapt it to how do we keep healthy or even alive. And the second is if it is over, when we get all these vaccines and more or less safe in reassuming our daily works and activities, we may be getting back to it. We will be travel again. The tourism will be reoccur again, and the same thing will be happen. We may have experienced 100 years ago with the Spanish flu. Maybe the few years it suffered, but then getting back to the normal. So for the first case, if we are trying to adapt it to it, of course, we will have a global recession for a few years, and we have to be live with a new normal. And so Johanna has already explained about in planning, architecture, or design. And he also pointed out, I agree with that, the value people have changed, going more looking into the family or in the house and to the culture or to the pride they have. and maybe the lifestyle will be changed. We cannot go out as we want in before. So we have to, we may need more on the community value. We need to more focus on the neighborhood, the community, how to improve the community spaces or the community garden, or so that kind of values or lifestyle, we have to get adapted to it. And heritage conservation, as before, may not be the prioritized, since the dead or alive issues is more being focused. And so, but anyway, the heritage in the form of another value may be more surfaced. So I may be sharing with what we are doing right now in the light of this pandemic. So for the heritage, instead of that historic building renovation or the investment into it, how shall we go back to what is the historic city, the environment, what was our neighborhood value, or our greeneries or the streetscape. So we are, even before this things happen, we have been working together with the municipal council in improving the public space, especially the street, to increase the walkability of the street. So we have to readjust the parking spaces, improve the pavement, and adding with the greenery and to add the street furniture. So that is what we are doing. So the city will be more enjoyable for the people to walk or to bicycle riding, to appreciate this walkable. So that is what we are doing. And for the non-motorized transport modes, to make space healthy and safe, to be accessible by the most vulnerable group, and as active responses to the more disasters if coming. So the public spaces should be to respond to be a responsive infrastructure as well, and for more eco-friendly public space improvement, and to value the community living. So we have a few projects on the public space improvement ongoing, and even that semi-lockdown time, we are working on the design and the starting to be ready for the implementation. And another one that we have been doing is 3 weeks ago, we have launched in public the Heritage at Home, so that people can dig up again their old photos and all these inheritance they received from their ancestors, father, grandfather. So, and then they can show into the public, sharing where do they get it or how these are being valued. So that has been quite a success, and many people have been responding to it to show, come up with the heritage they received that from their ancestors. So many people, as many as 200,000 people have responded to it. So that is what we are doing, and there's a many ongoing renovation project that we are still working on because of the construction works are resumed after a brief break last month. So for the second question, how it is affect? Of course, the tourism sector is being hard with this pandemic, but there's also some positive view that after resume back to normal after some time, maybe more value for money tourism will be and be restarting. So that is also one to anticipate. But if the things are better, that local tourism will be for sure resume because people have been staying in their home for a long time and they would like to go out anyway. So not only the big cities, many small cities have things to do. And as Professor Widodo has also mentioned, we have to revising the space requirements responding to the new norms. So the designers are in the role to do it again. And then the conservation works are still require that traditional scale labor. So maybe the not very expensive technology, but traditional local scale maybe still needed in use. And of course, because of being interested into own heritage or the own city or neighborhood pride, that is a more things to do, both tangible and intangible conservation. And one issue is because of the new norm, the use of private car will be a more prevalent or not in the city planning. But anyway, that when everything is to getting back to normal, that we have to rethink of our new form of development with a more cautious development and more cities building planning regulations to adapt it to be more safer and healthy urban environment. Thank you.
There. Okay. Thank you, Momo, for that. I think that it's two very clear and good points. One is that we should start focusing on our common spaces and public areas. No, oftentimes the public spaces or like community parks and all that are not normally seen as heritage sites, but that's part of our. It should be part of our experience.
Yes.
And I see a lot in our audience are very interested in the family or home heritage. I think also we
Yes.
tend to focus on heritage in terms of the national narrative, but also that
Yeah.
families themselves are bearers of their own identity and their heritage moving forward, and people should be aware of that. Okay. Thank you very much, Momo. I'd like to ask Ms. Kus Salma Nasution to join us. She's from Penang, the Vice President of the Penang Heritage Trust. Hi, Salma.
Hello. Thank you. And I'll say hello to all our friends out there. I'm very impressed at the participation.
Oops. Okay.
As you have heard, we may be in the same storm, but we all have different ships. Some people just have a dugout and some people have a luxury yacht. So people are in different financial and personal situation, or some people are just staying at home and they have because they're cut off from the family, so they happen to be living alone, whereas other people are staying in with extended family, so they don't feel alone. And it's interesting how people have become very resourceful in using their time to do things. In Malaysia, we had recently a political upheaval. So, as NGO, Penang Heritage Trust is an NGO which is an advocacy NGO which engages with government, and because of the new government and the upheaval with the old one, and so it's not easy for us to continue advocacy, except that we are still trying to stop all those mega projects which threaten heritage and threaten our, the environment of our city. So what we have been doing is that we are also doing more things online on social media, creating awareness and continuing, uh, talking about history and also how to link up and how to work together in this pandemic. We actually are very worried about the state of maintenance for our heritage buildings because there's nobody maintaining them. There's no funds to maintain them. Now we're having a rainy season, so it's very wet and houses are leaking. Even though at this time we actually have um, labor is and construction, contractors are much more easily available because they also don't have a job. But we have so many restrictions. So this is such a good time to rethink our development. And many cities in the world, like in Milan and London and Berlin and Bogota, they are actually rethinking their streets and how to turn over the streets to pedestrians and cyclists, because people are traveling less. There's a lot of streets that are opening up. The streets are not so congested, and we really need to make use of this opportunity to free our cities from private cars. But at the same time, people feel that it's more risky to take public transport. So we need to find a way to get people on the street, like walking, and that's how you also build that relationship with your heritage streets, because when people can walk, then they really can have time to see, to appreciate the buildings. But when people are driving all the time, there's pollution, there's noise, people cannot appreciate. So we need mayors with a vision, to reduce carbon emissions, to have more public space and greenery in the cities. And also maybe we have to change our food culture, because food eating, now restaurants have to open up so that you're not dining in a very congested restaurant, but you have to open up. So in some cities, I see that they are using some of the street space for cafes and outdoor eating, and that I think is very healthy. And in Southeast Asia, we have an outdoor eating culture. We need to go back to that. It's much more healthy in a COVID pandemic to have to eat outdoors, and also we need to rethink our food, because the most important thing that can protect us now is our immunity, and our immunity comes from not eating fast food, but eating natural foods and wholesome foods, and that means having food supply, short food supply chain, not importing things all the time, but trying to be as self-sufficient as possible in agriculture. So food is the key to immunity, and food is medicine, really. And I just want to say a little bit about my personal project, which I have been doing since the lockdown, and that is I've started gardening again. And also I'm trying to collect traditional herbs. So before, when I started, there were maybe 30 edible plants in the garden. I think in the last 2 months, I've about done. And ulam is it's a herb. It's a Malay name for the local herbs or the edible plants. And this group, although we just started recently, people are very enthusiastic. They're exchanging plants. So we are, based in Georgetown. So we are all close enough that we can still exchange plants. And we just do it over the gate sometimes, or we just open the gate. But and these people who are planting, they are, some of them are just in apartments. They just use the balcony or the window, and some people have actual gardens and some land and even farm, like private farms. But the idea is that we also need to reconnect to the soil, because soil is also our heritage. When you read about how industrial agriculture has actually destroyed, the land which grows our food, and it has actually not only changed the built environment, but also, I mean, industrial civilization, right, or industrial age has changed not only our built environment, but actually the very soil that we use to grow our food. So that also is important to restore, and to restore our connection with our nature, with our food, with our with the things that we grow, and that to create that connection with, not just nature as in public space, but nature is in what we are growing, that we eat, because that is also how we have been transformed as kind of modern beings. In terms of our diet, we have transformed our diet, and now we need to reconnect with that heritage, the heritage of our food. So it's what we call biocultural heritage. So I've been involved in heritage so long, and I've kind of moved from built heritage to kind of biocultural heritage and environmental heritage, where our food comes from the sea, which, the fish comes from the sea, and we're trying to stop a reclamation project. Our food comes from the hills. It comes from the outside, the hinterland of the city, and now it can actually come from within our homes. I think that's the new trend, because it's so important to know what we're eating and to reconnect with all our food traditions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Salma. I really liked your point about biocultural heritage, because oftentimes, of course, a lot of people start getting involved in heritage from the built heritage side, right? And I think you started off from there in terms of um, the pandemic allows us to re-experience the built heritage, in a sense that it allows for pedestrianization, it allows us to experience our city in a different way. But it's good that we also start asking the deeper questions about how we relate to our environment, how our culture is a manifestation of our environment, and that should also help understand and find our place in the middle of the pandemic, right?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Salma. And then from this point, we'd like to go to our colleagues from Vietnam. No? So we'd like to hear from Tam, Nguyen Duc Tam. Yeah. Nguyen, sorry. You're on mute. Yes.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, there
Can
you
you
are.
hear me now? Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am Deputy Director of the Center for Research and Promotion of Cultural Heritage. We are an NGO of the Cultural Heritage Association of Vietnam. And yeah, over the past few months, we have observed through the epidemic, and I think we saw a lot of new difficulties that heritage sites, museums, and communities in Vietnam are dealing with. So I would like to focus my talk on several points, trying to draw our experience, our colleagues' experience from heritage sites and museums, because their work is closely associated with heritage conservation, but also tourism. Heritage tourism is one of the national strategies. So the COVID-19 has caused during the lockdown for several months, for 2 months, I think many of the sites are closed, and they're losing their revenues, and the sites are, because most of the sites are depending their incomes from selling tickets and also selling services to tourists. So that's why many sites like World Heritage sites fall into huge problem of in their operations, and many staff have to be reduced, and even some of them, some of the sites running out of the salary budget and have to fire people, and so that's really sad. And but and also heritage sites like Hoi An City, a big city, or Mission heritage sites in the central. Most of the sites are closed and there are no tourists. So, but the other side of the coin is that the heritage sites like the Mission or ecological sites or the old town had the time to rest. Like let's say, it's the time to recover. But on the other hand, so but because the losing of people, and it causes a lot of risk for security, and also bringing a lot of conservation hazards to the sites, especially the collections and artifacts. So that's I think the very big challenges for the sites and museums, because they have no, practically they don't have any, the revenue is reduced and they don't have any money. So people are ready to go, and the staff are looking for alternative ways to make incomes, like selling stuff online, and so this significantly affect the work for some conservation. Big conservation projects has to be suspended. So but what we see, the positive side of COVID is that it's not bad at all, because it leaves the sites a time to recover, as I said, that especially for the natural or sites like national parks, or even archaeological site, because there's less pressure from tourism on the sites. Like the carriage level is like almost zero. So I think that's a very important aspect. But for the human resources, I think COVID has taught us to learn how to be prepared for such kind of epidemic or disasters. So in Southeast Asia, in Asia, I think UNESCO Bangkok has launched a program on preparedness on emergency for disaster risk. So I think it's the good time for, it may be a good time for science to be, in practical situation, because they have to be prepared and to be survive, and also to learn how to protect the conservation in time of difficulty. The other thing is that the other thing that the COVID has taught the heritage sector human resources, that they shift everything, almost everything, into online platforms. Meetings, talks, or work arrangement are done online, which had never done before. So they have learned so much from using internet tools, or many people even before, they had never used any kind of social media like Facebook or Vibers, or in Vietnam we have a local social media called Zalo. So Zalo is now become more popular and very effective, very similar to StreamYard or Zoom, but it is very local, and many, they have a large number of users. So also sites in order to keep maintain the interest of the public, they also become very creative in how to communicate with the public. For example, they develop 3D exhibition to put it online on the website, and to to trying to sell it to the put it on the social media and to try to attract people to keep the interest of the public. They also have to 360-degree like the exhibition, like it's very similar to a Google Street View, and you can walk into the museum, you can walk into the sites without coming there. And also have you heard of the song Gen Kovi? I think it became very popular recently internationally. I'm not sure if I can show you this. Sites and museum are very creative. I can share my screen so you can see.
Tang, sorry, we lost you for a moment. Uh, yeah. Okay.
Anyway, I will summarize what I want to show you. But so very creative to try to communicate with the public and to try to attract the interest. And also, COVID has given us a way to trying to adapt to social distancing. And you can see now at the side, even they are open, but they always have a hand cleaner at the gates, and you need to get in line, look 2 meters away from the others on the queue. So that's I think a very positive way to, because you could imagine many sites where they have so many people trying to get into the skip booth, and it's become a mess. But somehow it's a very good chance to reorganize the tourist lines. And for the science museum themselves, I think the COVID-19 has also given them a chance to reorganize their own activities. So they have to think about what is the most effective way to work. So I think online platforms for meetings or emailing or social media become very popular. So I think yeah. So that's pretty much what I would like to share with you. And also one important thing is that because now all the borders are now closed, even the nation is now open. The restaurants, bars, museums, schools are open again. But international flights are limited, so we are not receiving many international guests. So the science museums are now geared towards the domestic visitors, and the Ministry of Culture have run the campaign for the Vietnamese visiting the Vietnamese sites, so or enjoying the Vietnamese cultural heritage. So I think that's a very good a good thing from the side. So for COVID, the epidemic has given us a chance to reflect and to reevaluate the opportunities and the challenges. Yeah, that's I wanted to share with you. So I wanted to get back to later for more discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tan. And I think it drives home really on how much a lot of our conservation work is really tied to tourism, and that that while it gives us an opportunity to uh, to to examine our sites and then find out what the carrying capacity is and adjust to that, and also to innovate in terms of using social media, using technology. But of course, you always have to remember that that there are people who, because of the lack of tourism in all our heritage sites, they have no livelihood, right? And they are struggling also to this particular time. So we're not just dealing with the issue of saving our sites, but we're also dealing with saving communities and saving people, right? Right. Okay. So I think from here we can talk to Dr. Lee, also from Vietnam, Dr. Leti Min Lee. Oh yeah, she joined us late. She is the Director General of the Center for Research and Promotion of Cultural Heritage in Vietnam. Yes. Dr. Lee, we're glad to have you and join us here at our forum this afternoon.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm very happy to join the conference. Sorry about my technical problems. I think this conversation is very, very useful for us because in Vietnam we now have some problem with World Heritage. I just back from Hue City. We have no visitor, and we have to cut down a lot of people who work for World Heritage. So I'm afraid that this is a big problem for us, for security, for conservation, and for some educational programs also. I think in the future we need to find some solution for reduce the problem. Maybe we try to work with some company, for seeking the resources for conservation, for security also. I think the Tang contribution give a lot of information about Vietnam. I just want say hello to you and listen and hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee.
Yes.
It underscores also the observations of Tang about tourism and how it's struggling also, and how it affects our own heritage conservation efforts. And then finally, I'd like to turn it over to Michael Manalo, who is a commissioner with the Philippine National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Okay. Hi, Miko. Good afternoon. Miko, your mic is still on mute. Yeah. Miko. Hi, Miko. Yeah. You're still on mute. Yeah,
there you go. I'm on. Sorry, and thank you again. Thanks for inviting. Thanks to the Heritage Conservation Society for hosting this, and thank you to the Heritage Alliance for Southeast Asia. It's difficult because I have to wear two caps. I have to represent also the Philippines in this, and I can give you updates on what the National Commission for Culture and the Arts has been doing so far, in as much as addressing the situation that we're in. So basically, what we're seeing is we do need a lot of economic assistance for a lot of people who have been displaced by this pandemic. And the National Commission for the Culture and Arts of the Philippines has done its part in giving out an immediate cash assistance to a lot of our people who have been hit by this pandemic. So you're not just talking about people in the conservation, in heritage conservation per se, but you're looking at the broader spectrum of heritage and culture in the Philippines. You're looking at musicians, you're looking at dancers. A lot of people have lost employment. Those people who are in the restaurants and bars singing with bands and all of that. So they also have their needs. So the commission, NCCA, has given out that much needed economic stimulus for them. So this is the immediate response. What's nice about the program is that it also gives leeway to some of the committees within the commission to create their own projects. So you see a number of project proposals that are just very timely from, like, for example, I'd like to cite a proposal from the Committee on Archives that you do need to build an archive of what we're currently experiencing. We don't know if anybody's keeping track of all of the measures that have been put in place, of the constant recalibration of just all of the reports that are coming in. This is very important for us to know what to do in future scenarios of the same magnitude, just like we're referring today to something like the Spanish flu. So all of the information from today will be relevant for future instances, right? But we also wanted, I belong to the National Committee for Monuments and Sites, and what we were thinking of was something a little bit more simpler. We do know that we can't reach our heritage sites right now. It's very difficult to be physically in the heritage sites. So it's also difficult to carry out conservation work. A lot of the conservation work that is being done in the Philippines by the National Historical Commission, by the National Museum, by the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, those have been stalled. Those have been put to a halt. So even in places where there are practically no COVID cases, they can't work. So you have a large population working in conservation that has been displaced. What we were thinking of was something simple. We were thinking of just putting it back. I mean, we've all been talking, from the first speaker to myself, I think we've all been talking about people retreating back to their houses, back to their apartments, people spending time with families, and I heard people going back to gardening and all of that. So it means that you're going back to basics, right? Because your basic need is really just two things. It's your health and food, right? So these are the two things that we wanted to address. But then we couldn't address health in the National Committee for Monuments and Sites because that's a different issue. But we do have heritage sites, and we do have heritage sites with huge open spaces, with huge areas. And you do have communities clustered around these heritage sites. I think we have to go back and think that without communities, these heritage sites will not be able to be with us. I mean, nobody would build them, right? So it's coming back to that basic principle that all of this is born out of a community, and that a community has to be saved right now. So a community has to be safeguarded in order for our heritage sites to be safeguarded. So we were thinking of something in partnership with the Intramuros administration. So for all of you outside the Philippines, Intramuros is a 16th century citadel. So it's a walled city in the middle of Manila, and it used to be surrounded by a moat. So we were thinking of partnering up with them because in the early 20th century, the moat was filled in and it became a golf course. So today you have a combination of a golf course, driving range, and parks around around the walls of Intramuros. But the beautiful thing about what we've been thinking of was, what if we took a small portion of that land and converted them into what Salma was saying earlier, a colleague from Penang. She was saying earlier something about edible gardens, about vegetable gardens. So this is going to be something like a community garden for a specific community that has been displaced. So people need to eat and people need sources of food. And for a lot of people in Metro Manila, we've been talking about densities and all of that. A lot of people don't have the gardens. A lot of people don't have balconies. Some people live in very cramped spaces with 2 or 3 families. So they can't have that space. So what we're trying to do is making these heritage sites a surrogate for their sources, for like traditional sources of food. So imagine if you have a community garden producing vegetables in the Intramuros area, then you'd be servicing people living inside Intramuros, and you'd also be servicing people outside of Intramuros. But you do promote that that clustering that the quarantine is doing right now, right? So we're all being clustered into small zones, small communities, right? So you do have that cluster of Intramuros that feeds off from one source and just a select number of people. Everybody knows everybody. So you're putting it back to that with the basic intention that heritage has to survive if the people will survive with them. One of the interesting things that we were thinking about was, well, let's face it, no one's a farmer in this committee of ours of monuments and sites. So you're talking to individuals who are architects, interior designers, surface decorators, and engineers and the like. So we were saying that, wait a minute, none of us are farmers. And if we tap people on the ground, there would hardly be a farmer there. So we had to reach out again to look for partnerships outside of the heritage sector that could help us just go through, navigate this area of urban farming. And we found a beautiful group. They're called the Global Seed, I forget what the S is. So what they do is that they are in Cebu and they are also in the Mountain Province and the Philippines. And what they do is that they promote organic seeds. So it's really going back to organic because, well, we all know that Salma, our colleague from Penang, had been telling us all about like how industrial farming has ruined the soil and all of that. Well, it has put food in on our tables, but the thing is, if you give a seed that is chemically treated to somebody in the city, and that person doesn't really know the first thing about farming, then more often than not, it's a failed experiment. So if you do it with organic seeds, then you would see natural pollinators coming in. You would see everything natural just converging. So it's going back also to what our colleague from Penang was saying, that it's going back to the soil, because the soil is everything for us. So I think this is a time of a lot of uncertainty. I was looking at the questions earlier, and there are a lot. There's an overwhelming number of questions, especially from people in the tourism sector, of how they can conduct tours in the new normal. I would want to just think about it as something that is uncertain. And in a time of uncertainty, I'd like to hold on to something, something real, something true. I'd like to have a source of food, and I'd like to have a community backing me up, working with me, and tilling the soil, and all of that, so that when the time comes that we can all reopen again, then we'd all be safe and healthy. The other thing that this project that we were cooking up would bring to light, there's a secondary effect, and the effect would be the effect would be something of what do you call this? Something of a relevance to a sector that originally didn't look at this built heritage with any value. So it's very difficult to bring the concepts of heritage conservation to a sector, to the working class, especially in the central parts of the cities in the Philippines, or in Manila at least. It's very difficult because this is more or less a hand-to-mouth situation. So first thing in mind is I have to eat. I have to put something on my table, or else I don't survive. Heritage, I may work in a heritage hotel, or I may work in a heritage site, but the value to me is more economic, right? So now it's making these heritage sites function also for this sector of society that doesn't have a lot of access right now to food. And it's making it relevant to this sector of society, the sector of society that normally heritage conservation may not cater to. So in the future, you look back and they may say that, look, if not for that urban garden, that urban farm, then we would have been really, really hungry. We would have gone hungry and lost our wits or anything. It is survival. So it's heritage giving them back that mode, that means of survival, right? And it's these people carrying that heritage into the future because they see a renewed value. They see a renewed significance in this heritage. It's not anymore just the lofty ideals, the aesthetics, the beauty of it all, or the history of it all. It's something I lived through. It's something that gave me sustenance in a great time of need. So this is something that we also need to focus on. The last thing is probably the idea that we're always recalibrating. We're always adjusting. And this constant adjustment also gives birth to new traditions, right? So you see everywhere in the Philippines, it's almost been closed off, right? There are certain areas that are still open and people are free to roam around. But for the most part, cities and small towns have been closed. A lot of the churches, which form part of the heritage of the Philippines, have been closed. But a lot of these churches and parishes have moved online. So it's a delight to see that I can move from a service in the Manila Cathedral, for example, and next week I'll be going to church in another church in another building in the city or outside, or maybe even in Cebu. There have been churches from Cebu that also have been broadcasting masses and services. So this is also a way of keeping this heritage alive, because we need to constantly recalibrate until we reach that new normal, right? So it's going back to a normal that isn't the way it was before. It is supposed to be a normal that is an improved version of how we were before. So everybody had been talking about open spaces, better streets and parking and all of that. So this will also be taken in consideration. So one of the things that going back to that urban edible garden, that community garden concept, what we were thinking of was it can transition to something more like that would service a greater portion of the city. So you have already people who are knowledgeable in planting and keeping plants alive, right? And sustaining this environment. But you can tweak that, and you can make these urban gardens nurseries for all of our open spaces that need greening, that also need a lot of care. So in turn, you were giving employment to all of these people who have been tilling the soil, who already know how to navigate through it. So anyway, maybe I'll just leave you all with that. I think I've said enough. And again, thank you and happy Heritage Month from Manila.
Okay. Thank you very much, Miko. And I think in a way, when we all talk about heritage,
Thank you very much, Miko.
yeah. So in a way, we're all talking about heritage, no? And then I think there's an aspect of heritage in which we are supposed to go back to our roots, right? And so literally here, by exploring things like urban farming and all that, no, as a way of connecting heritage and communities, no, we are literally going back to roots in that way. So on that point, let's take a few questions first from the audience. Okay, let's take a few questions from the audience. Let's see. So we have our first question here. It's directed to Salma. Salma, how has COVID directly affected the philosophy or sentiment of conserving Georgetown for the sake or the use of tourism? Is that a sentiment that had been there and is there now, or generally, how is that playing out right now? Thank you.
Well, the state government has made statements recently that they are still expecting tourism to resume in the very near future. But I don't think that tourism will resume. And even if there's a bit of travel, it will never be on the scale of what we have seen before. Not for a very long time. So we should just put tourism out of our minds for the moment. It's not something we can depend on. And we should think of other ways to sustain our heritage sites apart from tourism. And of course, education, local visitors will resume. And that is a very important source of purpose and income to local heritage sites. And I want to say that I really appreciate what Michael is saying about turning some of the grounds of the heritage sites into edible gardens, because we're facing COVID pandemic, we're facing lockdown, but there's going to be more pandemics, there's going to be climate change, which is even worse, and this is just the beginning. So it is never too soon to re-establish that relationship with the soil and with other people, with community, because in the end, you see, we have to depend on our local communities, and we have to start doing kind of risk assessment, not just of heritage, but of the city as a whole, of our communities, and what kind of a risk climate change and pandemics are going to bring. So we have to do this together.
Thank you, Salma. I think this one is directed to Jonathan. What role does the URA play in the Pearl Bank Apartments redevelopment?
Actually, the URA came in as a facilitator, as well as a connector for us to the developer as well. Because without the URA, we could not have access and start a conversation with the developer. I mean, of course, on our side also we still have people who have connections as well. But without the URA's backing and their support, we were unable to. We wouldn't have that that connection to the developer and share with them alternative ideas to pull back. Yeah, so that was primarily their role, and of course to see what other incentives they could give to help cushion the alternative schemes that we're trying to put forth, like bonus GFAs, any incentives they could give in terms of development charges and things, and taxes and things like that. But I think beyond that, it was quite difficult for the URA to proceed to go anything beyond policy, because it was quite a short amount of time. But they were quite helpful from the start to the end. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. We have a general question for anyone on the panel. Let's see. What guidelines or protocols would you see if, although I know that Michael addressed this a little bit earlier, for heritage tours in the new normal, because is virtual tourism really possible, considering that experiences are at the core of tourism? Anyone from the panel? Yeah. Maybe Tang would want to answer that.
I'm trying to look for I'm trying to look for the exact document that the Department of Cultural Heritage, the body under the Ministry of Culture, is responsible for administrating all the heritage areas in the country, to give them instructions during the epidemic. So the guidelines are along the guidelines provided by the government and also the Ministry of Health. But so basically, it says that to keep the safety of people at the top priority, and also to keep the protect the artifact from collection and the site, and also to reduce the impact of epidemic, and also So but there's not really a system, because we have already the law on cultural heritage and all the documents, legal documents under the law providing guidelines. But during the epidemic, they have a clear instruction. It depends much on the law. I cannot draw
Anyone else has thoughts on that in terms of tourism and heritage and experiences? The question was, is virtual tourism possible, considering that experiences are at the core of tourism? Anyone? Let's see. Momo?
Hello.
Yeah, hi. Yeah.
Hi. Tourism, of course, will be suffer, but as I have mentioned that, of course, once the issues, I mean the problem is subsided, the domestic tourism will be, of course, resumed. So the people don't want to wait to go out somehow. But of course, there should be a lot of preparation for health and safety measures. So I think the first one will be domestic tourism. So and as the other speaker has talked about, that virtual tourism will be also the one option. But of course, the travel and tourism is it's you would like to go by yourself to get the experience. So, but we cannot say how long. But as soon as it is possible, it will resume somehow. But for the time being, of course, the industry suffer the most.
Okay. There's a question here. And this one really goes out to everyone. Is there a system or protocol in place in your respective countries to ensure that on-site maintenance and care of heritage sites is not compromised during the ongoing or even future lockdowns?
Yeah. So I think at the moment it's not considered as an essential services, I think.
Yeah.
But I think we learned from this incidents of COVID this year. It's a good learning point for us. And exactly, I think that is one agenda that the ACHA, the organizer, co-organizer of this event, the Southeast Asian the Coalition, the Cultural Heritage Alliance, that consists of NGOs, heritage societies in the 10 ASEAN countries, to think together and then to advise the ASEAN government actually to patch the gaps in the heritage law and regulations in different Asian countries. So we are planning to engage the Asian leaderships actually to discuss about this, to see whether there's a possibility to learn from the lessons from this pandemic, and whether it's also important to take care some of the fragile conditions of some of the heritage sites.
Okay. So it's something that we all have to work on to come to some kind of guidance for our respective countries. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. We have one more question. Okay. I think at that point, I'll step out of the room for a moment, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Laya Bokiren, and she'll be giving us a short synthesis of the conversation we've had this afternoon. Okay. But I'm glad to have met all of you, and I do hope that we all stay in touch, that for all our future work, we can all collaborate and help the conservation movement in our region. Okay. Okay. So Dr. Laya, she'll be giving.
While we're waiting, can I just make a comment? Do we have time for a comment?
Go ahead.
Oh, yes. I just wanted to also mention that we shouldn't forget that, town planning, both modern and I think before modern town planning, arose because of the concern for public health. And for example, why modern town planning has to take into account that, our sewage systems are separated from, the healthy parts of the city, or functional parts. And so modern town planning also takes into account for our need for recreation, for exercise, and so forth. And with this pandemic, we actually have to rethink town planning and also appreciate how people have been living more sustainably in the past. Our indigenous building traditions were much more sustainable and much more open to nature, and nature comes into our towns and our cities and our habitats. So we I think have to get away from this kind of industrial town planning. So I just wanted to mention that. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that, Salma. Am I on? All right. Thank you to our resource persons, and thank you to everyone watching this forum brought to you by the Heritage Conservation Society and the Southeast Asian Heritage Alliance. So, specialists located within networks of communities and countries with shared and diverse experiences. One confluence we find in ASEAN is the commitment to continue to make heritage conservation meaningful to stakeholders from various disciplines, historical, cultural, and material particularities. And also, on the other hand, to genuinely serve communities as we collectively seek creative solutions in responding to this public health concern that we have. Moving forward, our speakers shared solutions that range from macro, broad strokes at the national level to specific ones located in one's institutional or community contexts. Some keywords that rose out of this forum include time, public space vis-a-vis home, rethinking, reconnecting, and community linked with the idea of sustainability. So Dr. Widodo, for example, talks of opportunities despite the current uncertainties that we're all experiencing. As countries struggle with the economic issue and the loss of jobs, level of businesses, this extended pause that we have right now gives us time to think or rethink of using heritage as a capital for recovery. I think that's a very important keyword that we have. On time, it gives us this moment of rethinking of what we can change in the design of spaces and also the way we live. So important is the renewal, for example, of affective ties or emotional ties in the home, that as we miss museums and sites, we take stock of our heritage and use this moment as a time to learn as well, with all the Zoominars that are happening right now. Dr. Widodo also mentions the greater urgency for biodiversity conservation efforts or the revival of green living in relation to healing. Jonathan Paul from Singapore presented to us case studies in modern heritage for sustainable solutions, along with technical, market, and policy challenges that they're contending right now. And he also brought up the need for new resilient building typologies and the necessity to develop both navigate through this difficult process. I think that's something that policymakers can work on in collaboration with the public and private sector as well. Dao Momo Alwin from Myanmar talks of home and public space. So she begins by asking, how do we keep healthy and alive as we live with a new normal? So even before we confront issues on making heritage relevant, we confront this issue of staying healthy and alive as we contend with the new normal. And it's the very same issues that communities are also responding to and trying to grapple with at this time. So Momo shared to us a participatory project consisting of crowdsourced memories in the form of photographs shared to the public or heritage from home. A few striking points include the renewing of ties in the community. So instead of investing in renovation of historical building, the thinkers, the policymakers, and heritage actors now ask, how do you go back to a renewed appreciation of the historic city or the places, and how do you improve public spaces to increase walkability, for example? Linked to this, we underscore the need for more responsive public spaces, conducive for community living, the need for cautious development adapted to a safer environment. In relation to that, Salma talks of rethinking and reconnecting. I like the metaphor of the soil, for example. So we're now at a time where we're learning to collaborate and foster linkages. We're rethinking development. And an example given by Salma is rethinking streets, rethinking the heritage street, for example. But this needs, and she emphasizes this needs policymakers and government working together and implementers within the government with a vision to reduce carbon emissions and other climate implications. Related to that is the need for reconnecting with our food culture or bioculture heritage, aptly phrased as the need to reconnect with the soil. We heard about the importance of what is now termed as urban revival, sustainable food sources as a way to reconnect with our food traditions. Dr. Lee and Nguyen both talk about the struggle right now among cultural institutions with retrenchment, the loss of jobs. But at the same time, some countries use this moment for utilizing existing staff to develop creative and new ways to communicate with the public and a chance to reorganize activities and even think of public programs for disaster risks. Last but not the least, we have Architect Manalo from the Philippines talking about the broader spectrum of heritage stakeholders in the Philippines. So for example, he cites the entire ecosystem of creatives and ancillary services, not just the specialists, not just whose occupational identities, for example, you operationalize the term heritage. He cites the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, giving an economic stimulus for stakeholders that they have. So, for example, committees within the commissions create their own projects, and that's something that the NCCA, as a policymaking body, welcome as well. So, for example, the Committee of Archives responded by making the practice of archiving respond to contemporary conditions, a sort of COVID archive that they're trying to build right now. Architect Manalo also talks about the need to safeguard both communities, often in clusters around these heritage sites. And he cites the Committee of Monuments and Sites collaborating with the Intramuros by starting a community garden. So from this, we can glean that as people sustain heritage, as various specialists and stakeholders sustain heritage, heritage may in fact sustain people and stakeholders. That's all for the proceedings. Thank you very much and happy Heritage Month. Back to Tats and Mark.
Thank you, Laya. This has been such an enlightening and encouraging forum. The discussion points were just so well threshed out. There's so many positive concepts that we can hang on to move heritage conservation forward. So to our panelists, thank you so much for being with us, for taking the time to be with us today. And we hope that we encounter you again soon and have a nice exchange once more like this. And in behalf of the Heritage Conservation Society, I wish to thank all of you who have been watching us. If you have picked up something useful, then we hope you can help us move forward conservation practices despite our situation now. We are, the Heritage Conservation Society is now open for membership. We'll be accepting new members. Just go to our Facebook page, and if it drives you to do so, please send us also a donation. And we wish everyone a very safe and healthy existence during this pandemic. I would also wish to thank our backstage group, Jack Garcia, Keith Reboriano, Gio Absede, Laya Bukiren, Florabel Tupas, and Orlean J. on StreamYard. Until then, please stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you for joining us.